Good morning. The Hearing Board of the South Coast Air Quality Management District is in session. Today is Tuesday, May 14th, 2019. The time is just after 9:05 a.m., and we are meeting in the Hearing Board room in Diamond Bar. We have two matters on calendar today. The first is on our consent calendar, and we'll hold it to the end unless there's anyone present for that matter. Is anyone present on Federal Aviation Administration case number 5292-2? Seeing none, we will hold that consent calendar item for the end of our hearing today, and we will proceed with the one matter that is on our regular hearing calendar, which is Equilon Enterprises, LLC, doing business as Shell Oil Products, case number 4982-120 for an emergency variance. And who is representing Equilon Enterprises this morning?
Good morning. My name is Ev Ashworth. I'm with Ashworth Leininger Group, and with me today is Nadir Solomon, who is the transfer manager at the refinery, at the terminal, as well as Mike Waller from our firm.
Thank you. And can I ask if you can just spell your name for the record?
Sure. The full rendition is Everard, E, V as in Victor, E-R-A-R-D, and the last is Ashworth, A-S-H-W-O-R-T-H.
Thank you, Mr. Ashworth. And who is representing the executive officer this morning?
Mary Reichert on behalf of the executive officer.
Good morning, Ms. Reichert. Before we begin, I'm just going to ask anyone who wishes to testify in this hearing, Equilon Enterprises, to please rise at this time to be sworn in. Please raise your right hand. Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. So the procedure of this case is that it did come in for an ex parte emergency variance. That ex parte emergency variance was granted until today. And today's hearing will be on an emergency variance. And so as we do with all of our emergency variance petitions, we're going to bifurcate. There has been no notice to the public of today's hearing, and so the first step will be to hold a first part of the hearing on whether there is good cause to proceed in absence of notice to the public. And I don't know, Mr. Ashworth, whether you are familiar with what we need to cover in that first part of the hearing.
Yes, we are. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to ask then for your opening statement as to good cause.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the Hearing Board. My name is Everard Ashworth. I'm with Ashworth Leininger Group, and we're a technical consulting firm providing services to Equilon Enterprises. We're here on behalf of the Petition Equilon Enterprises, LLC, which does business as Shell Oil Products, U.S. Today's hearing relates to the Tank 1515, one of the above-ground domed external floating roof storage tanks that Shell operates at its Carson Distribution Center, located at 2945 Wilmington Avenue in Carson. Last Tuesday on May 7, Shell was granted an ex parte emergency variance to address violations of the AQMD rules resulting to damage to the secondary seal on Tank 1515. For the reasons that our witnesses today will explain, Shell was able to repair the internal seals last week, but then determined that the tank must be drained and taken out of service so that the floating roof seal can be completely replaced. This will take longer than 30 days, and accordingly, we would seek an interim and short variance today to accomplish that task. We also wanted to, if that would be acceptable. So we also wanted to point out that on page 6 of our variance, in block 20, there's a misstatement. We indicate that tank 1515 is undergoing degassing. That is not the case. So if I may ask you to strike the first sentence in block 20 on page 6 to remove that introductory sentence. I'm here today with two witnesses that will provide testimony shortly, Mr. Nadir Solomon, who's the terminal manager at the Carson Distribution Complex, and my colleague Mike Waller, who's a senior engineer at Ashworth Leininger Group. We believe that the testimony of Mr. Solomon and Mr. Waller will demonstrate that there is good cause for today's hearing, and having found that, we meet all 6 statutory requirements for an interim short variance. We appreciate the opportunity to participate today. And I would pause now if there's any questions of us. If not, we can begin our direct testimony.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Ms. Reichart for her opening, and then we'll come back to you for your witnesses. But I just wanted to be clear for the board and the record. So you are asking to convert today's emergency variance hearing to an interim variance?
Correct.
Is that correct? And you plan to request a short variance hearing?
Correct.
And so for notice to be sent for that as well?
Correct.
Okay. We'll note that for the record. Thank you very much. Ms. Reichart, your opening on good cause.
Good morning. The district is not opposed to a finding of good cause and has no objection to converting this hearing to an interim. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ashworth, your first witness on good cause.
Good. Thank you very much. Our first witness is Mr. Nadir Solomon. Would you please state your name?
Nadir Solomon, Nader, last name Soliman.
And what is your title?
Carson, Terminal Manager.
And what do you do in that role?
My responsibility is operation for the distribution terminal for Carson.
And how long have you been in that role?
I've been in Carson as a terminal manager since late June of 2018.
And could you tell the hearing board a bit about how Shell Carson Distribution Complex operates?
Carson Distribution is a group of tanks that store fuels from jet, diesel, and gasoline. And also we receive chemicals via rail cars. And we have a load drag that send trucks in and out. So basically we receive fuels in via different mean, and we distribute it out to LA Basin.
Thank you. Could you briefly describe the problem that has brought Shell before the hearing board today?
Tank 1515 is a contact water tank in Carson facility. It was discovered that the secondary seal on a tank is folded over and have crack, which is not passing inspection. And there is a diagram if the board is interested to see how the seal is designed.
Why don't, if we may, introduce a graphic which illustrates the tank and general description of the tank in question. And if we could have one copy for the clerk.
Let's take a minute to make sure that gets passed out to the board before we proceed.
And then if you could give that to the board.
We have a short emergency. We'd like to just take 1 minute off the record, and we'll be back in about a minute. We're off the record.
Gotta make sure that our cell phones are off too, right? That would be embarrassing. And so what we'll do is we'll just walk through the key features, the dome, the roof, and how there's open space, and then we have the individual legs. And
We don't need to go into detail about each
Right.
thing, just the dome,
Boom.
floating liquid.
and then here is the center vent hole.
We are back on the record, and we've received a conceptual drawing of tank and tank seals, and we're going to mark that as exhibit number 1. And I believe we'll be putting it on the screen at some point. And you may continue, Mr. Ashworth, with Mr. Solomon.
Thank you very much, and you made, I thought, a thoughtful suggestion that Mr. Solomon might stand up approximate to the drawing and then use the overhead with a pen to point out the features of the tank. Maybe if you could do that.
You can go back and forth when you're talking about it and you want to point it out. We'll put it up on the screen, and just make sure to take that microphone, pull it towards you, and make sure it's on.
Yeah. There's a copy up there already. Yeah, it's already there. Yeah. Right. See, there's that. All right. Do you have a copy of it? There we go. All right. Well, if you could place it up, great. Thank you. Well, thanks, Mr. Solomon. If you might explain the features of an externally domed floating roof tank.
1515 is a dome tank, geodesic dome, which is just the roof around the tank itself. On inside of the tank is a floating roof. Under that is the liquid level. In this case, is a mix. Contact water is hydrocarbon and water. The roof itself have what we call legs to make sure that the roof is supported. Normally, when you have liquid level, it floats in liquid. Around the roof itself, across the diameter, there is a seal. And I'll bring it up a little bit. There's 2 seals around the roof. There's a primary seal, and it has a fabric and a mechanical shoe to make sure that the fabric is close to the diameter of the wall itself. And there is a secondary seal. Secondary seal is the one that failed, and is a rubber material, thick rubber material that also it provides a secondary protection for vapor around the roof itself.
Great. I think, great. You can come back, I think. Thank you very much, Mr. Solomon. You mentioned that the tank contains contact water. What is contact water?
Contact water is a term that we use for water that made contact with hydrocarbon. And
how much contact water was in tank 1515 when you first discovered the problem with the secondary seal?
Tank 1515 level was around 75% of the total volume that the tank can hold.
Is there a requirement that the floating roof be a certain level prior to entering the tank?
Our safety requirement or regulation requires the height, the level in the tank to be at least minimum of 2/3. When we send contractors and operator inside confined space, there is a minimum height requirement to give them protection when they enter, to make sure that the distance is not too high when they enter the tank, landing on top of the floating roof.
And what was the purpose of the inspection?
The inspection was scheduled for us to pin the roof on low legs, and there's 2 height of the legs itself. There's high and low, in order to for us to start treating water and discharge it to the sewer system per our permitting and a contractor that it was scheduled. Pinning the legs low was to provide us that to bring the volume in the tank to the lowest point without landing the legs.
And so when the inspection was performed, what was identified when you first entered the tank?
So when the contractor entered the tank to pin the legs low, they make an observation that the secondary seal have cracks and also flipped over, which is not, visually is not, they consider that secondary seal is compromised.
And so what did you do after you learned that the secondary seal was compromised?
So we stopped the contractor and we pulled him out, and we put a plan together to repair within the required time, which is 72 hours to be repaired for completion.
Can I just stop you there? It would be very helpful for this part of the proceeding if we could have exact dates as you go through your testimony.
So going back, what was the first date when you entered into the tank?
Thursday, May 2nd.
Right. And so on Thursday, May 2nd, what did you do when you learned that the the secondary seal was damaged?
So we follow protocol to do the repair in service. With in-service repair, meaning that we replace and repair the secondary seal while the tank is static, but full of liquid, full of hydrocarbon and water. The process itself requires Shell internal approval, and also the contractors that we have approved to complete the work for us, they have their own internal procedure on approval to do this kind of repair.
And have those procedures changed recently?
Their procedure had changed. There is a strict requirement to do in-service repair, and it's been implemented recently.
And that was done for safety reasons?
It was done to make sure that when we enter the tank was in service, there is a precaution and mitigation to the risk with the people working inside the tank.
So the procedure is directly to address potential risks to the workers inside of the tank?
Correct. It's a safety precaution that requires not only review, but is required to follow a strict guideline of what type of work, what type of tools, what type of experience for the working crew.
And so the procedure then requires that you outline the specific tasks necessary to complete the repair of the secondary seal.
Correct.
And when do those preparations begin? On what date?
The preparation is started on a Thursday night into Friday morning. We started the approval process, and we start putting a plan together to make the repairs for the secondary seal.
Did you encounter, so on Friday the 3rd of May, did you encounter any complications in the preparation work?
We require the contracting crew that Shell have used in the past. Both of them encountered some delay to get internal approval for the crew, and also to have the crew to complete the work were coming out of state. So they put in the requirement, and they didn't have people or crew available to complete the repair during that time.
When was the plan for the safe repair of the secondary seal completed? On what date was that?
So the work to repair secondary seal was scheduled for the following Monday.
All right, and that would be on then the 5th of May?
The 5th of May.
Right. And so the plan was in place by the 5th of May?
Yes.
All right. And when did the crew re-enter the work to begin repair on the seal?
Last Friday, May, can't remember the date. Yeah, last Friday the team re-entered to complete the repair. May 10th.
And so between then on Monday, May 6th and May 10th, what took place that opposed the delay there?
It was a lot of delayed discussion around the safety precaution. Is the tank safe to enter? And also providing enough sufficient protection for the rescue team. So for confined space entries for the mechanics to go in to complete the repair, they have to go from the tank hatch down into a ladder to get on top of the roof. That require a fall protection to be in the harness, but also required to have a standby medical crew to rescue. In case anything happened to him, we'll be able to pull him out.
And so on Tuesday, May the 7th, it became clear that we would extend beyond the 72-hour time frame allowed by the district rules. What do we do on Tuesday, May 7th? That's when we filed for the
Yes.
Sunday.
Sunday.
So Sunday, so to be clear, going back on Sunday then, we had to report to the district, and was that report made on Sunday, the 5th?
Sunday, we learned that we're not going to be able to make the 72 hours because the crew is not going to be able to enter the tank and complete the repair by Sunday noon.
And then when do we apply for the ex parte emergency variance?
On Sunday.
On the following? Yeah, maybe.
We're going to keep it to, if you have something to add, we can get to you in a moment, but if you know the answer, then answer. If you don't, say you don't know the answer.
Okay, then we'll go through with Mike Waller, and we'll figure up, complete the time frame there. And so then on Friday, the 10th of May, when we entered the tank, what did we discover?
So Friday, we re-enter the tank to complete the repair after we come up with a safe plan to execute the work for the mechanics and the crew and the contractor and the rescue team itself. When the crew enter, the part of the safety protocol and procedure that Shell put in place is the initial step for the entrant to complete an Lel reading across the tank roof to make sure there is no reading and level. Individual Lel monitored, every entrant, they have it on them, and the alarm is set at 10%. During that time, away from the ladder, one of the entrant Lel meter register 15%.
And when you say LEL, what does that translate to? Does that stand for lower explosive limit?
Lower explosive limit, correct.
And what is the maximum percent lower explosive limit that Shell employees or contractors can be exposed to?
So the guideline is 10% and 15% where he got it. So it alarm, it give him audible, which is an indication for immediate evacuation.
And with the immediate evacuation, was that performed?
Yes.
And were readings taken away from the seal itself?
So after the contractor exit the confined space and he was closer to the dome by the hatch, he did multiple readings and we registered 0 Lel.
And so to recap, we had 15% lower explosive limit proximate to the seal and 0% lower explosive limit at the tank hatch.
So he registered 15% away from the entrance. When he entered, he registered 0 Lel. He walked away to do an area monitoring, and the point farthest away from his where he entered the tank, that's where he got the reading. He exit and at the hatch, he got 0 Lel.
Thank you. So did we perform any activities on the tank itself once we obtained those readings?
We stopped the work and is the guideline for Shell safety rules and guideline that it required to take the tank out of service.
What do you have to do, Mr. Solomon, to take a tank out of service?
So tank out of service in order to complete the repair is to drain the tank totally out of liquid and also degas it, become vapor-free.
And how long will that take to do?
So the process for this tank is a long time because it has a lot of liquid in it, and we're not designed, the facility is not designed to go somewhere else with the water itself.
And are there other options for draining the tank any faster?
So we look at multiple options, explore multiple options to do the repair in the quickest way. We have a second contact water tank that next to it, and the second contact water tank doesn't have enough space to hold the entire volume of tank 1515.
So you can't simply pump the water someplace else?
So the contact waters are not piped or linked to any other tank. It's just linked to each other. And we cannot transfer the water anywhere else without using trucking or other mean of transport.
Have you already started efforts to drain the tank?
So we had the process developed already and permitted to treat the water, and we're in the process of treating water right now.
Okay, thank you. And so that concludes Mr. Solomon's presentation. I'd now like to introduce Mike Waller.
If you can hold up for a moment, I'm going to first ask Ms. Reichardt if she has questions, and then the board might have questions for Mr. Solomon. Ms. Reichardt, question?
Thank you. Can you just explain exactly what LEL, like, what is that measuring? Like, what are these vapors?
Okay, so the hydrocarbon generate vapor when heated, or there is a point that evaporate, turn from liquid into gas. The LEL is a measurement of lower exposure limit. That means that vapor present in the air, and potentially with a spark could ignite or generate an explosion.
And a spark could ignite at 15%, or what percentage?
Is much higher. So
It's much higher than
Much
that.
higher. The 15% is more for personnel protection.
Okay. What chemicals are in that vapor?
So the vapor itself is more into combination between the liquid with the jet diesel. It just generate hydrocarbon vapor that it's heavier than air, so it's set a little bit closer to the liquid level. And if you have a compromised seal, there's potential that it comes up.
Okay. And I didn't quite understand exactly what the trigger was to determine that you needed to drain the tank. Is it just because those levels were reading so high, or what exactly was the trigger?
Correct. So the trigger to take the tank out of service and drain it is the presence of LEL in the space between the floating roof and the dome.
Okay. So because it was leaking out into that space, they determined it was not safe
Correct.
to perform the repairs while there was still liquid in the tank?
Correct.
Okay. And how much volume you said it's called contact water?
Contact water is the liquid with rainwater that potentially or make contact with hydrocarbon.
Okay.
And that's what we call contact water, meaning that both of them touch each other basically.
Okay. And what's the volume that's in the tank?
So the about 28,000 barrels.
Okay.
You could calculate that the gallons, every barrels is 42 gallons.
Okay.
And it has around 28,000 barrels.
Okay. And this is going to be removed tank by, or like truck by truck load?
Truck by truck. And the tank only have one connection, so we're able to do one truck at a time.
Okay. And do you know where you're taking it yet?
So we're putting a plan together to put in, get the water treated, and we have a permit to discharge it to the sewer system. And the remaining hydrocarbon in the tank is going to be transferred to Baker tanks. And that's going to be
transferred to what, I'm sorry?
to a holding tanks, a portable holding tanks.
Okay. So you're going to take the water out,
Treat it.
treat it,
Yes.
then discharge the treated water into the sewer system, and then take the hydrocarbons and put them in a holding tank.
In a holding tank, on-site temporary holding tanks to get the tank liquid-free and degassed.
Just, I feel we're going a little bit off good cause, possibly.
right.
We could wait until the.
I was just trying to understand, but you're right.
But we'll have that opportunity, should we pass good cause.
Thank you. Thank you for keeping me on track. I got very interested in understanding the process. Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, and I understand that you'll need to understand the process should we proceed, and there'll be ample opportunity. And hearing board members, I'm going to ask if anyone has questions. Just a reminder to keep us all on track. We're looking at questions with regard to whether they're in violation, also whether the circumstances that led to that violation could not reasonably have been avoided, also diligence in petitioning, and finally that a denial of the interim variance or a hearing would be an unreasonable and unavoidable adverse impact to petitioner. And with that, are there questions? Ms. Burt.
I just had a very basic question. Has this ever happened at this location before? The secondary seal
Secondary seal.
cracked, folded over?
Replacement, yes.
And when that happened, how was it handled at that time?
So normally, the guideline and the rules is if part of the seal is compromised, we only allow to replace 25% of the seal or no larger than 100 feet. If the whole seal need to be replaced during an inspection, required to take the tank out of service.
Okay, when was the last time maybe that you had to
So
do this?
we have done secondary seal repair, but in a normal service with the gasoline or jet, we have other option to put the product somewhere else. So transfer it from one tank to another
Okay.
through pipeline.
So you haven't had the contact water issue?
Not that
Tank.
I'm aware of.
Okay, so technically, it's not exactly the same, so it hasn't happened before. Has it happened at any other location that Shell has, do you know?
I'm not aware.
Okay, thank you.
The last inspection before the one on May 2nd was in November?
November, correct. That's a visual inspection that is done every 6 months.
Okay, and so this was the usual 6-month visual inspection, is that correct?
Visual inspection was due in May. The entry was to pin the roof on low legs to treat water. In addition to, is due for a gap inspection, which is required every 10 years.
But you would have, if you had not those other inspections, you would have been doing the visual inspection, is that correct?
At May.
In May,
correct.
May 2nd, okay. Is there, you had testified earlier about a crew, a safety crew or a medical crew being there when entering. So is there an opportunity or a requirement for any kind of visual inspection other than the 6-month inspection, which would have shown that there was this crack in the secondary seal?
The only one is the 6-month, and it's a visual inspection is done through the tank hatch, and also the technician lowered an Elia meter inside the space, and both of them, the inspection in November when it was completed, it was done that the seal is in good shape and there is no Elia in the tank space.
Thank you. And it was on Friday that you determined, that was last Friday, the 10th, that you determined that, in fact, you'd need additional time to drain the tank?
Correct.
Okay. And you didn't know the answer to this, but is it correct that we have your petition that is stamped on May 7th, which is a Tuesday when the district reopened? Do you know whether that's the date you filed, or we'll wait for the next witness? Okay, we'll wait for the next witness. Okay, those are my questions. Anyone else? Mr. Balagopalan?
Yes, Mr. Saul, I'm a little confused. Mr. Ashwood mentioned there's no degassing. You were talking about degassing. So are you going to be degassing the tank after it's emptied?
So we degas the tank when we land the legs on the roof, and that become the vapor space that we connect the degassing unit to the tank.
And let's not get too much into the merits until we pass good cause. So if
Okay.
you have good questions on good cause, that would be,
And so what's the normal operation of that tank for the contact water? How do you normally operate the tank?
So the tank would normally get water either from the tank farm or during a rainy storm. And between the two tanks, we transfer to get to a certain height to be able to go in and do the pin leg process. And we schedule a vendor to treat the water for us.
So the water is periodically drained from the tank, treated, and then goes into the sewer?
Correct. So they come in and they set up a portable equipment with the burner to treat the water, and they have the whole process permitted in order to release to the sewer system.
And so when they discovered the tear, basically, and it was due to a normal inspection, or?
When they did the tear, it was two things we scheduled together. We schedule putting the roof itself on low legs to be able to get as much volume out of the tank when we treat water. In addition to, it was scheduled for 10-year gap inspection, where the operator go measure the gap between the tank wall and the seal, and it has to be within certain tolerances.
Oh, so it was in the 10-year frame that was done. And so that's when they discovered that the secondary seal is folded over. When you say folded over, what exactly do you mean?
So the secondary seal itself is the flapper is making contact with the wall, and it should point it out, and it should be very close to the tank wall itself. And in this case, they found it down.
Okay. And it was all around the circumference of the tank?
I haven't seen it, but the individual that made the observation, he said that the seal is folded and need to be replaced.
And it's not obvious how long that has been occurring, how long that has occurred?
So we're not really sure, because the last inspection in November, the condition of the seal passed and it was in good condition.
So sometime between that, it folded over. Okay. Okay, thank you.
I have a follow-up.
Yeah, Ms. Burt.
Excuse me. So the 10-year gap inspection, that's an industry standard? Is that what you're referring to?
That falls under industry standard, yes, correct.
Okay, and so the semi-annual is a district rule requirement. And are there any other industry standards that might have gotten you to inspect this at a different time?
So we have at Carson, we have a tank engineer that they keep up with all the requirement or regulation for taking tank maintenance and repair. And there is also a program where we take the tank totally out of service and they do a complete repair to the seal. So there is a program for run and maintain.
Okay, and as far as you know, you have met all of those requirements for each maintenance and repair inspection based on industry standards?
As far as I know, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Senator, did you have questions?
How does the water enter the tank? You may have explained already. And what's the purpose of it if it's there by design?
To enter the tank, Senator?
How does the water enter into the tank? And if it's there, what purpose does it serve if it's by design that the water is there?
So in order to enter the tank is a confined space, and the entrant, they have to go and land on going down the stair, going to the roof, and they do a seal inspection. The seal is designed to.
I think the question was, how does the water get into the tank?
Sorry, Senator. The contact water is the tank itself is connecting to other tanks through a very small line, where we have a separator that remove free water in a product and it go to tank 1515. So in addition to, if we have a rain event and we have sumps in the facility, the sump is also connected to 1515, where to transfer the water into what we call the contact water tank. So any potential with drain water, any potential from the sump, it go to that holding tank.
Did the water serve any purpose at all?
It doesn't. It's just by permit, we're not allowed to release it unless it's treated. So 1515 is more into holding on site till we get it treated.
So the climate conditions is the reason why the water gets into the tank, is that correct?
Last year we had a heavy rain that it was unusual for the site. Treating the water normally goes by the tank level. It depends on how much rain we got during the season.
Okay, where's the protocol you mentioned for a mechanic or an individual to enter the tank to make the repairs?
So the protocol for the tanks, they have to have fresh air, they be in breathing apparatus, they be in tie off to a harness for fall protection. They have to have their all personal protection experience. Not everybody that goes into confined space, but also they have to be experienced in seal repair, which is one of the requirements. We require them in order to do in-service repair to use only hand tools. There is no drilling. There is no pneumatic tools. There's only hand tools.
So it's safe to perform a function in the tank if the level is 10% or lower, but 15% they can't They have to get out.
Correct.
Why?
So it's an industry with the contractors also have the same rules as Shell, is more into a potential of ignition. If they have any sparks or any potential, is more into making sure that because there is hydrocarbon in the tank, to stop work and exit.
Well, how do you eventually reduce that level to 10% where it's safe? I know you take it out of service, but how do you do that? What's the operation for doing that?
So Senator, I have the same, this is the, I think is more into, a condition was set to make sure that any LEL over the 10%, which is set by industry standards, is to stop work. The contractor and Shell kind of have the same standard, and this is what we follow.
Do you ever see 15% level?
I'm not aware of with this incident. When the operator reported, he said he got 15% and he exited the space.
And did you ever reduce the level in that tank below 15%? And if so, how was it done?
We have to drain the tank, right?
Yeah, the only thing, Senator, will be removing to get, in order to complete the repairs, to get the vapor, the potential of vapor present in the space out by removing the hydrocarbon and degassing the tank.
So that's the operation for reducing that level.
Correct. Normally, the degassing unit is a burning unit that connects to the tank and burn the vapor with the hydrocarbon to get the LEL % down.
The rim-mounted secondary seal, that's the circumference of the tank?
Oh, the whole circumference, that's correct.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Balagopalan.
So what delayed, the delay was because the contractor didn't have personnel and they had to come from out of state?
There is delay because of the qualification requirement that Shell and the contractor put in conducting in-service repair. In addition to also the requirement for having fall protection for the rescue team.
But isn't that something that they're trained for? And I mean, I'm trying to see what happened. I mean, that's normal, that's what is required anyway, fall protection, checking the LEL levels and so forth. Correct. So what was the delay in the contractor having to wait for somebody from out of state to come in and do all that? What was the...
So the contractors were ready to provide out-of-service repair for us with the crew they have, but they're putting certain requirement for the crew completing the in-service repair. And that's why they didn't have enough resources and they have to get people from out of state.
And, okay, so that delayed
the process.
So once you started on May 10th, how many days did it take to complete the repair?
If I may, that's why we're here today for a short and interim variance, because we'll need an additional beyond 30 days for the purpose of the repair.
And we'll cover that should we get past the good cause.
I thought it was to drain it completely, but did you, the seal repairs, what I'm asking? I know you need...
And if I may, we cannot conduct any repairs because the concentration is in excess of a safety guideline of 10% LEL. So all work had to stop within the tank. The only option that we have, as we'll speak to, is to drain the tank. So there's no repair work going on there today because of this 10% LEL exposure that was identified when the workers entered the tank.
Okay, so...
And that was a stop work.
And just be careful of getting into a little bit of testimony. I know you're recapping the testimony,
Right.
but...
Okay, no, thanks for the clarification, yeah. So there was no, so you're looking now at draining the tank before doing any seal replacement?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on good cause for Mr. Solomon? Okay, thank you. Mr. Ashworth, you had a second witness on good cause you wish to introduce?
And if I may, we have a copy of the November tank inspection, if that would be helpful for the board to have in the record, where we can inspect the tank and confirm that the secondary seals were in proper working order last November 2018.
Board members, anyone wish to have that in addition to the testimony that the seals were in good condition. You would like to see that? Okay, then why don't we have that?
My colleague, Mike Waller, will give a copy, and I'll provide a copy to the district.
Let's take a moment to pass that out to the board.
You need an extra copy, Eric? For your staff, for that. There you go. Apparently, we also have a copy of the May 2018 inspection, if that would also be helpful, but this is the most recent.
I think we can stop at the November. Thank you. Okay, we've received a document that is a multi-page document, and the heading is South Coast Air Quality Management District Rule 1178 Compliance Report, and we're going to mark that as Exhibit Number 2. And you may continue.
Thank you very much. I now will introduce my colleague, Mike Waller. Please state your name for the record.
Michael Waller,
And what's your title?
Senior Engineer.
How long have you been in that role?
As Senior Engineer, about 10 years.
Could you please describe your general involvement with this matter?
Ashworth Leininger Group is contracted by Shell Oil Products U.S. to provide ongoing compliance and permitting assistance to this facility. And in the case of Tank 1515 specifically, we were contacted after learning that the secondary seal, had failed, and we were asked to provide assistance in determining and assisting with compliance in this matter.
Thank you. Are you familiar
I'm
with...
sorry, can I just interrupt you? Can you spell your name for the record?
Michael, Michael, Waller, Waller.
And did you indicate whether you took the oath this morning?
I did take the oath.
Thank you. You may proceed.
So, Mr. Waller, are you familiar with the violations that are identified in the application?
Yes, I am.
What are those violations?
In summary form, the Tank 1515 is not in compliance with the secondary seal requirements of Rules 463, 1178, the permit to operate.
And those are identified on page 3 of the application?
Yes, they are.
Do you believe that Shell continues to be in violation of the permit conditions and district requirements that are listed in the application?
Yes.
Did Shell seek breakdown protection under Rule 430?
Yes, they did.
We would like to reference our breakdown notification number 560632. A written report will be submitted within 30 days or 7 days of when the tank comes into compliance. So this was an oral report which was made to 1-800-CUT-SMOG.
That's correct.
Were you involved in preparing the ex parte emergency variance petition?
Yes, I was.
When did Shell file that petition?
The official filing occurred on Tuesday morning of May 7th, as soon as the district opened. But a email notification was provided to the clerk of the board as well as engineering and enforcement or inspection staff on Sunday morning.
And Sunday, that would be the 5th of May?
Sunday, the 5th of May.
Why was it necessary to file that petition?
It was necessary to file the petition because the facility would remain in non-compliance. They would exceed the 72-hour repair limit that is imposed by both Rules 463 and 1178.
Mr. Solomon testified that Shell was unable to repair the tank last week when it remained in service and that Shell was going to drain the tank and following draining it, degas it, and take it out of service. How does that affect Shell's compliance with the rules listed in the emergency variance application?
Once the tank is drained and connected to degas equipment, the degassing equipment controls the emissions from this tank to a level that's been determined by the South Coast Air Quality Management District to be in compliance with the provisions of this rule.
Were you involved in preparing Shell's interim short variance permit application?
Yes, I was.
And we would like to then modify our ex parte variance application as we indicated this morning to change that and modify it to be an interim short variance. Why is it necessary for us to convert our ex parte emergency application to an interim short variance?
Due to the time that it will take to drain that tank and then to subsequently connect it to degassing equipment, it will exceed the 30 days of the emergency variance.
And in your opinion, Mr. Waller, does Shell have any other options for achieving compliance that have not been described so far?
No, they do not.
And that would conclude our presentation on good cause, Ms. Prusak, and we'd be happy to engage in further discussions, whether you or the district.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ashworth. Ms. Eckhardt, any questions for Mr. Waller?
Thank you. When did you first realize that you would not be able to complete the repairs in the 72-hour window?
Well, we did the inspection, as discussed already, on Thursday, and immediately.
And that would be May.
May 2nd, thank you. And immediately upon discovery of the secondary seal malfunction, Shell and the contractors, as previously stated, began organizing contractual arrangements to get contractors back into the tank to perform the seal repair. Those discussions and contractual arrangements occurred on Friday, Saturday, and by Sunday morning it was determined that we were not going to be able to make the 72-hour repair window because the contractors were not going to be able to be back on site until Monday or Tuesday morning.
When would the 72-hour period expire, or when was it set to expire?
It expired on Sunday at about noon.
At about noon, okay. So as of on May 3rd, on Friday, which would have been the last day you could have filed before you did on Tuesday, did you at that time think that you would still be able to complete the repair in the 72-hour period?
It was still unknown at that time because we were still working, well, Shell was still working with contractors to make that determination. So it was unable to be determined at that time.
Okay, thank you.
Board members, Mr. Balagopalan.
Mr. Waller, so when was the first time that South Coast AQMD staff were notified? Is it when you did the breakdown report, or?
That is correct.
So on May 2nd, there was no notification or to the compliance staff?
That is correct because we were still in compliance at that time. Under the rules, we're allowed 72 hours to complete the repair.
So when you've determined that you couldn't do it in 72 hours on May 5th, you called a breakdown?
That is correct.
Okay, and then you got the breakdown. That's the number that was cited, right? 560-632?
That is correct. 560-632.
62. And then May 7th on Tuesdays when you filed the ex parte?
That is correct. Tuesday morning.
Tuesday morning, after it was determined that it couldn't be done.
That is correct. And on Sunday as well, we did send out an email to the clerk of the board as well as our inspector and permitting staff at the AQMD that we would be filing for an ex parte variance.
And that's May 5th, right? Yeah.
That would be Sunday, May 5th.
Okay, thank you.
Board members, any other questions? I'm going to hold this. I had one question on the rules from which you're seeking a variance, but I think I can find other violations, and I'll hold it for the hearing on the merit should we get there. Any other questions on good cause? Okay. Mr. Balagopalan.
That you mentioned it, so you don't anticipate any violation of the degassing rule?
No, the degassing rule, we're required in summary form to provide notification of the degassing no more than 2 days prior, so we will provide that notification, and then we will degas the tank per Rule 1149 requirements, which require us to be connected to a vapor control system, which has its own effluent discharge limitations per the rule.
Okay,
and this is a very standard process for this type of industry.
And that piece of equipment has been permitted by the...
Correct. It's contractor permitted.
Okay.
And we'll get to that. Any other questions on good cause? Okay, seeing none, and you have no other witnesses on good cause?
No, but I think, just to recap, I think our witnesses demonstrated.
One moment. I just want to make sure Ms. Reichardt has no witnesses to put on with regard to good cause.
No witnesses, thank you.
Okay. Now, Mr. Ashworth, would you like to have your closing on good cause? This would be the time.
And I think we've presented before the hearing board today, respectfully, that there was an ongoing violation of district rules that remain today, that the situation could not have been anticipated in time for a scheduled public hearing, and that Shell exercised due diligence in first seeking an ex parte emergency variance. And then today, with an interim short variance, as we know, the repairs will take longer than 30 days. The testimony, I think, also underscores that denial of an interim variance would present an unreasonable and unavoidable impact to Shell through unavoidable noncompliance, at the same time that it must drain tank 1515 to under a safe operating practice.
Thank you. Ms. Eckhardt, any closing on good cause?
The district is not opposed to a finding of good cause in this matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Board members, I believe we can find good cause to proceed. Of course, it's quite obvious that the petitioner is in violation of several district rules, in particular because the secondary seal is cracked and flipped over and not in compliance with district rules. So I don't think we have to go any further than that in terms of good cause. I do believe that the circumstances that led to the violation could not have reasonably been avoided because or anticipated sufficient time to provide public notice, given the time frame that was provided. The May 2nd inspection was the first time since November, and we now have as exhibit number 2 the November inspection report, and I did see on what looks like the second page of that exhibit that there was nothing determined to be a problem with regard to the secondary seal at that time, and also we have testimony as to that. And May 2nd, it was found, and we heard testimony that it's difficult to do that visual inspection, and it's only required every 6 months in accordance with district rule. And so I can find that it could not reasonably have been avoided or anticipated. With regard to diligence, I think we can make that finding. We heard again, May 2nd, they still thought they might be able to make that 72-hour window that's provided in the district rules. By Friday, they had still hoped that they could make that. It wasn't until Sunday, when the district was closed, that they determined that due to safety reasons and other scheduling issues, they could not get the seal repaired. And then they filed first thing Tuesday morning when the district reopened, the district being closed, including the clerk's office on Monday. I believe that sufficient diligence in filing, and it would be an unreasonable and unavoidable adverse impact to deny an interim variance hearing, in that if we required them to make the repairs, that would be unsafe. And I believe that's an unreasonable and unavoidable adverse impact to petitioner. Anyone else have any thoughts with regard to good cause findings? Mr. Balagopalan?
Yes, it appears from the November report that they didn't measure any LEL. It showed 0% LEL when they did that inspection in November. So I think in between November and May, something happened to the seal. And I think it was prudent of them not to do any work when they measured 15% of the LEL. It's a safety consideration. So I think they rightfully, and it looks like there was some delay because they didn't have personnel who were qualified to go in and do the work. They also called in the breakdown appropriately when they knew in the 72 hours they couldn't do the repair. So on May 5th, they reported the breakdown and got a reference number. So they did that in a timely manner. And then I think you mentioned all the filings that they did. So I think we can find that I think we can find good cause based on that they did a timely. I think they went through, they did what they're supposed to do, checked the LEL level, found the conditions was not safe, could not do any repair, and then notified the district appropriately.
Ms. Burt?
I just wanted to add that petitioner also mentioned that they had no knowledge of this happening in this type of situation before, so there would be no necessary reason that they may have anticipated that a contact water tank such as this would have this issue, and that they would have the type of problems that they would have, even if it had the issue, in getting the repairs done. So I think we can find good cause.
Thank you. Senator, any thoughts?
And when the level reached 15%. Protocol says it's unsafe and not to risk the health, safety, and welfare of the repair personnel who were well qualified to do the job. So they just couldn't do anything beyond that point, and therefore time would lag and time. You did what you have to do. You have to file the report late.
Thank you, and that reminds me, thank you, Senator. Because this has been converted to an interim variance and because the petitioner is for the first time today requesting a short variance hearing, I think it's important to also add in the fact that it wasn't until Friday, May 10th, that LEL of 15% was determined to be unsafe to continue with those repairs, and that the decision was made to have to drain the tank, therefore requiring a longer period of time for repair and a short variance. And today would be the first opportunity after that to request that interim variance. And so diligence in filing for the interim is also, can be found on the evidence. Any other thoughts? Okay, so then I will make a motion. In the matter of Equilon Enterprises LLC doing business as Shell Oil Products U.S., case number 4982-120, I move that we find good cause to proceed to the merits of this interim variance hearing in absence of notice to the public. Is there a second? Second. No. Senator seconds. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Mr. Balagopalan, how do you vote?
Yes.
Ms. Burt, how do you vote?
Yes.
Senator, how do you vote? I vote yes. Motion passes 4-0, and we will move on to the hearing on the merits. Let's do a few things and then we'll take a break. First of all, we had received, I did not mark it because it is for the case on the merits. We received proposed emergency variance conditions, which I assume will change to interim variance conditions, and we will mark that as Exhibit A as in apple for the district. In addition, I'm going to ask Mr. Ashworth, do you wish to incorporate all of the evidence and testimony from the good cause portion of the hearing into the hearing on the merits?
Yes, please.
And Ms. Eckhardt, any objection?
No objection.
Okay, all of the evidence and testimony is hereby incorporated, and we will take a short 15-minute break, and we will proceed from there with both the openings, statements, and any additional evidence and testimony that we need to make the 6 findings for a interim variance. So we are off the record, and we'll be back at 10:25. We're off the record. We're back on the record, and we are proceeding now with the merits of the interim variance hearing and a finding of making of the 6 findings. So, I don't know why we have some feedback. Sorry, Mr. Ashworth, if you'd like to start with your opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Following their direct testimony, Mr. Solomon and Mr. Waller are prepared to present additional testimony on the 6 mandatory requirements for an interim short variance, should the board wish to proceed. If the board feels that such testimony is necessary to consider good cause, we would, if there's additional issues there, we would also happily be to return to that issue. But it sounds like we're satisfied on the good cause side. I'd like to take them in reverse order, if I may. I'll first talk to Mr. Waller and then Mr. Solomon, and I'll pause now for additional.
That'll be fine. And Ms. Eckhardt, for your opening.
Thank you. Subject to the testimony presented here today and compliance with the proposed conditions, the district is not opposed to the granting of this variance. I did have, in addition to the correction that the chair noted, changing the interim or the emergency to interim in the variance conditions. After speaking with petitioner and staff this morning on condition number 2, in the last line, instead of 8 hours, we'd like to change that to 6 hours.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so let's proceed with your first witness on the merits.
Thank you very much. Excuse me.
Senator? I'm sorry? We already did that. You mean to incorporate that evidence? We did that before we left. You did that? Before we left on break. I tried to get all those out of the way.
We appreciate the senator watching out for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the board. Mr. Waller, could you please again state your name for the record?
Michael Waller.
And for the benefit of the record in this portion of the hearing, please repeat the AQMD rules that Shell is currently violating at tank 1515.
The rules that Shell is violating at this time are rules 463, 1178. For the tank rules, specifically sections 463, paragraph C2, paragraph E4, paragraph F1C, then rules 1178, D2, G, and H4. They're also in violation of condition S13.2 of their permit, which requires them to comply with rules 463 and 1178, and then also rules 203B, 2004 F1, and 3002 C1, which require the operator to operate in compliance with all permit terms and conditions.
Before you proceed, am I just missing it from my petition, or do we have a copy of the relevant portion of the permit?
We have a copy of the permit here today, Madam Chair, and we've referenced the section 13C of that permit. We would be happy to provide a copy of that to the clerk.
We do not need the entire, permit copy, but we would need the condition S132 from which you're requesting a variance. We would need to see that.
Good.
We have that.
If I may. And because we're so thoughtful, we only brought 3 copies, but what I will do is I'll provide a copy here to the district council, and perhaps if we may ask the clerk to make copies, we'd appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
I've got one.
And Madam Clerk, is it okay if we proceed? Okay, we'll proceed while those copies are made.
Thank you very much for pointing that out to us, Madam Chair. Mr. Waller, what are the emissions typically associated with tank 1515 under normal operations?
Under normal operations, this tank would have, based on the permit terms and conditions that are applicable, based on the potential to emit of this tank would emit roughly on a pounds per month basis, 60.1 pounds per month.
And that 60.1 pounds per month is taking into account the transmix and the contact water.
That's correct.
And what are the emissions that are excess of that amount estimated as part of the short interim variance?
Shell estimates the emissions of this tank without the secondary seal at 273.6 pounds per month.
And how is it that you reached these estimates?
We use the EPA AP42 emissions equations to calculate the emissions from this tank. And under normal operations, this tank would be operating with both a primary and secondary seal. But since the secondary, and so we calculated the emissions that way as normal operating emissions with the contact water in the tank. Under current conditions, without the secondary seal, we ran the same tank model, the EPA AP42 equations, and we did not incorporate the emissions reductions that would occur based on the use of a secondary seal. So to recap, under normal operations, it would have a primary and a secondary seal. Under current operations, it's only operating with the primary seal. And that's how we calculated the emissions normally and in current conditions.
And is a copy of your tank emission calculation runs attached to the variance petition?
The variance petition includes both those EPA AP42 tanks runs and shows the emissions on the last page of each section of the tank's runs. We did not include a copy in Excel of the summary of how those emissions calculations could be summarized, but we do have copies that we can present to the hearing board as well.
I think that might be helpful, Madam Chair, to summarize the individual tanks, and we would offer copies of the summary document.
We're going to wait until the clerk is back in the hearing board room, and so is there additional testimony we can take before we get that? Okay, let's
Yes, Madam
go with
Chair.
that then.
All right. So earlier this morning, Mr. Solomon testified that Shell was unable to repair the tank last week due to safety reasons, and that for those safety reasons, they must now drain the tank itself, degas the tank, and take the tank out of service. How does that decision affect Shell's compliance with the rules listed in the variance application?
Once the tank is emptied, drained, and connected to degas equipment, it will again be in compliance with the permit terms and conditions applicable to this tank.
So upon connection to tank degassing, then we would return to compliance.
That is correct.
And how does that decision affect the emission estimates that are contained in the variance application?
Once the tank is connected to once it's connected to the degassing equipment has vapor control inherently built in, and the excess emissions will no longer be there because we'll be connected to an approved and permitted vapor control device.
So once we're attached to the degassing equipment, we would return to compliance?
That is correct.
What, in your opinion, could Shell do if this interim short variance is not granted?
In my opinion, Shell will continue to empty the tank in the process that's proposed because that's the most efficient way and the quickest way to return this tank to compliance.
Are you familiar with the potential enforcement consequences if Shell must continue draining tank 1515 without a variance?
Yes, I am.
And what are those consequences, if you might describe them to us?
If we're not allowed to drain the tank will remain in non-compliance with Rules 463 and 1178 because tank repairs cannot be made until the tank is emptied and degassed.
And if that were the case, would there be any change in the emissions from the tank itself if the variance were not granted?
If the variance were not granted, Shell would be required still to drain the tank to make the repairs. If the variance is not granted, these excess emissions will remain the same, whether or not the variance is granted.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Waller. And now we have a copy of the permit terms and conditions that are associated with our non-compliance, which we provided to the clerk. That might be introduced.
Oh, sorry.
Right.
I didn't realize.
That would become Exhibit
3.
We're going to mark it as exhibit number 3, I believe.
Correct.
Okay, so we have a section of the permit, and we'll mark that as exhibit 3.
And if it's helpful to the board, we could provide a summary of the emission calculations that Mr. Waller has just described to you. That is not contained in Appendix B, but it might be helpful to bring those. The values are consistent with the tank runs that you've seen in the appendix itself.
Sure, we will take a copy of that, if you have copies made.
Thank you very much. Did I give you a copy of it? And that is the end of the questions that I have for Mr. Waller. Mr. Solomon has additional questions regarding the other 6 findings.
Okay, I'm going to pass it on to Ms. Reichardt then, if you have any questions. Oh, why don't we wait till we
I
have...
have a copy of that.
Why don't we wait until we have that, just in case there's questions on that document? Okay, we received a one-page document entitled Excess Emission Calculations, and we're going to mark that as exhibit number 4. And I will pass it to Ms. Reichardt for questions.
Thank you. So you had testified that once the equipment's attached to the degassing equipment, you'll be in compliance. How long do you think it will be until you get to that point in the process?
I'm not the one best equipped to answer that question, but I know it will extend past the 30 days of the emergency variance.
Okay, but you'll have another witness to testify to that timing? Okay, no further questions.
Okay, I have one question with regard to 2 of the rule sections and provisions from which you are requesting interim variance relief. And those would be Rule 463F1C and a similar in Rule 1178H4. And both of those deal with reporting requirements, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and both of those have a 120-hour requirement, is that correct?
That is correct.
Do you believe you need continuing variance relief from those provisions?
When the tank contractor entered the tank to affix the roof legs in their position, and then also noticed the secondary seal had folded over, the inspector was not able to complete a tank inspection report. So we do not have something to submit to the board within the 120 hours as required by the rule.
Okay, and in your opinion, it's a continuing violation, is that correct, until that report is submitted?
Correct.
Okay, and that will not be able to occur until the tank is degassed, is that correct?
Correct, until they can go in and do a complete assessment of the tank seals.
Okay. And then the other question I have, and I don't know if you're the witness, and if you're not, please say you're not. I wanted to understand a time frame with regard to the degassing and to understand when you anticipate being in compliance and why it will take the amount of time it will take to do so.
I'll defer that question.
Okay, then I will hold it. Board members, other questions for Mr. Waller? Mr. Balagopalan?
Yes, Mr. Waller, just a clarification on the excess emission calculation. Did you perform the tank calculations?
I did.
And you said you used EPA tank form, which is on AP 42?
Correct.
Now, are there any issues with using that particular program?
There are known issues of using that program. It is based on the EPA AP 42 formulations, but there are some errors in the programming of that. These errors are not expected to affect this calculation.
Okay, so, all right, so then you did, so the excess emission that you calculated is with and without secondary seal, and then you got the monthly, and then you divide by 30 to get the 7.1 pounds per day?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, board members? Am I reading this right? Is it S 12.3?
Yes, I apologize. I just noticed that it's the S 13.2 condition was not included in our exhibit. and I apologize for that, has all the other conditions that are applicable to this tank, but that S condition is a system condition that was not visible on the page when we were making the photocopies. It's higher up in the reclaim permit. But the S 13.2 condition is very simple. It states that the shell must comply with rules 463, 1149, and 1178.
Okay, and we'll just confirm that if we could with the district witness, and if not, we'll just take that testimony. Okay, other questions, board members? Any other? Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Balagopalan.
Mr. Waller, are you the person to answer how they will take the LEL readings, or is it going to defer to how those measurements are going to be done?
I'll defer that to Mr. Solomon.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions, then you may introduce Mr. Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Solomon, could you please state your name again for the record?
Nadir Solomon.
And Mr. Solomon, you testified earlier today that removing tank 1515 contents is your only option for making the repairs necessary for compliance. Do you have any other options for curtailing operations within tank 1515 at this time?
Taking the tank out of service is the only option we have. We have stopped the movement from the liquid prior to May 2nd, so the tank is static. There is no liquid addition going to the tank.
And so by prohibiting additional contact water to come in to the tank, you've effectively limited those operations.
Correct. The operation is halted. It's just that tank remained to have the liquid content.
Thank you. What is Shell doing now to minimize emissions of the tank while it's being drained?
So currently, operators are taking Elia meters on the tank between the dome and the space of the floating roof by using a handheld Elia meter.
Thank you. And while the tank is being drained, when you're measuring the LEL, how is that performed? If you might describe the process here for the hearing board.
The operator will go in through the stairway around the tank, open the manway or the hatch door, and have an Elia with them and record the reading and leave it to stabilize. There's a procedure. It's a common practice for operators to do. They do it when they do lockout prepping equipment. So they're trained to do an Elia reading.
And at this time, if I may, I'd like to introduce an LEL reading log. Is this the log that is being recorded, Mr. Solomon?
This is correct.
Right. And if we might share then with the clerk of the board examples.
Okay, we'll take a moment to pass that out to the board members.
And I believe this should be exhibit number 5, I believe.
We have a one-page document entitled Lel Reading Log, and we will mark that as exhibit number 5.
And Mr. Solomon, if you might just explain how it is that this log is prepared and documented.
The log was prepared by fuel supervisors and issued to operators, and communication through emails with the requirement for the reading. And that is present at the control center at Carson, and also verified that the reading is completed by the area supervisor.
And during the term of this variance, if it is granted, would the practice be to continue to provide these data on a daily basis?
We are planning to continue taking Elia reading on tank 1515.
And that log, if it's requested of you by a district inspector, would be made available?
That's correct.
Good, thank you. Are you, and as part, you had heard earlier today of the time that's going to be required to complete draining the tank and then connecting it to degassing. And that degassing will now be in compliance with the underlying district rules. Could you explain to us the procedure that's now underway and your estimated schedule for completion of the draining of the tank?
Correct. So the tank contained 2 types of liquid. There's water phase, which sits on the bottom of the tank. and the hydrocarbon phase is just below the roof. The roof itself sits on the liquid level, floats on the liquid level. Currently, we're in the process of treating water, and it comes in from the bottom of the tank. And currently, that operation is in progress. In order to connect the degassing unit to the tank, the water has to be treated. We connect the degassing unit prior to landing the roof on its legs. The legs length is around 7 feet long, and currently the liquid level around 26 feet.
And so what amount of time is it, based on your best estimate today, is to complete the draining of the tank to allow for a connection to the degassing unit?
So the treatment operation is limited by how many gallons per minute that we could discharge to the sewer system. And this is where the over 30 days, the calculation estimate come from, is the limitation of how fast can we treat water.
And so do you have an estimate at this time of the maximum amount of time that you would require to drain the contents of the contact water?
Where the estimate that my team and myself came up with is around 45 days maximum.
And so that 45 days would extend beyond the emergency variance of a 30-day period.
Correct.
And then for that reason, we would require an interim short variance. That would complete my questions for Mr. Solomon, and we would be happy to respond to questions that you all may have.
Thank you. Ms. Eckhardt, do you have questions for Mr. Solomon?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to clarify, because you had testified that the reason we needed to do this, the emptying of the tank, was because the Elia level had been up higher than what was safe, but then it looks like when we're taking the readings, they were all at 0. Can you explain the discrepancy?
Sure. The LEL, the 15% that it was measured by the contractor, he was walking on the roof itself. He was in the confined space, and he was totally opposite away from the hatch, where is only the point that the operator could open and do an LEL meter. So
I see. So the readings are being taken at the hatch, and that's where it's a 0. You're having a 0 reading.
that's the only place an operator could take a reading without entering in the confined space.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
And if I may, that's why we believe our calculations to be conservative, because at the point of release to the atmosphere, we're seeing a 0% LEL.
Okay, and we'll have time for closing after. Okay, was that all your questions, Ms. Eckhardt?
Yes.
I thought so, okay. Board members' questions, Ms. Burt?
I just had a little bit of a clarification question. You said that your limitation for emptying the tank is based on your ability. Is it based on the ability to actually treat the water, or is it based on the fact that you have a discharge permit limit that won't allow you to discharge more than that?
Ability to treat water.
To treat,
Yes.
okay, thank you.
Mr. Balagopalan?
Is it Solomon or Solima?
Solomon.
Solomon? Okay, thank you. So the water that is in the tanks, it's part for the storm discharge and from other cleaning operations or from other tanks, you said, that goes in there?
Correct.
And so when you take it out of service, and the other one, you said it cannot be used. You have one other tank, is that correct?
We have another tank next to it.
Is that at capacity, or is that?
It says have enough capacity for us to continue operation, but it doesn't have enough capacity to transfer
The full-
1515 content into the tank next to it.
Okay, so you can use that for what 1515 used to do?
Correct.
So then and when you said you're treating, what are you doing? Neutralizing the water before you get discharged?
There is a whole permitting process for treating water. GEM is the contractor that is conducting the treatment right now. And the water stream will connect into a burner unit to make sure that all the hydrocarbon is burned off. In addition to, there is a chemical treatment for bacteria and so forth.
And you have NPDES discharge limits before you put it this work?
Correct. That water sample get tested before and after.
Okay. And then I think you testified that these readings for the LEL is not at the the circumference of the roof where it potentially could be much higher and unsafe. Is that correct?
The reading was taken with the contractor when he entered it away from the entry point from the stairs. It was an opposite of the enter point.
When that 15% was registered?
15%, correct.
Right, but all the subsequent readings that you will take will not be on the circumference of the seal, but from the, are they going to drop it down, or is it through the hatch, or what?
So they open up the hatch and they put, there's a sample tube that it goes in without putting their hand and their body inside the dome itself. And this is where the sample get collected, closer to the roof itself.
And how far down do you know it goes?
The tube is about foot long.
Foot long, okay. So it's measuring somewhat
Measuring
on
very close to the hatch of the tank.
the hatch of the tank, okay. Oh, that's it. Thank you.
Senator.
Exhibit 5 says there's no reading. The LEL is 0. And which suggests to me at least that you continue the operation if these are the readings. But even though they can be the reading, my question is, what determines at what point is decided not to continue operating this tank?
Senator, the tank right now there is no water addition to it. We're just treating water, taking water away from it. If we get any LEL at 10%, we have to report it.
I understand that. At what point did you take the measurements that is determined that it's 10 or 15%? And what area you take this reading where it says 0? Is there a distance?
Senator, it might be helpful if we could have Mr. Solomon annotate the various locations of the sampling on the photograph.
That'd be great.
Oh, that'd be great, yes. Why don't we?
Would Mr. Solomon, would you go over to the podium?
Okay, so we are going to put Exhibit 1 back up. It's already there, I believe. Go ahead. You can continue, Mr. Solomon.
And Mr. Solomon, if you might use your pen just to indicate the two areas in question.
Sure. The roof, when the contractor entered and detected 15% at LEL, the roof itself was higher. In the drawing, it was at 26 feet. The only enter point to the tank from the dome, there is a stairway around the tank itself to access, and there is a platform at the access point closer to the hatch. And when the 15% was detected, and the operator went down, and he walked around the whole roof to detect 15%.
At what point did you detect the 15% as you?
So it was opposite of the enter point. And where we operated currently with the log sheet you have, Senator, is with 0%. The operator would go out every 12 hours, open up the hatch, and take the reading.
Outside?
At this point.
Outside?
Yes, very close
Outside
to
the tank is 0.
0.
And what's the significance of 0? I mean, this reading.
So normally in LEL, it could be a pocket that get released, but it's not going, the vapor is not released all the way to the top of the roof. That's what we believe it happened. That's why it detect 15%, but when the operator take the reading, there's zeros.
This tank is 1515 number.
1515, that's correct.
How many tanks are out there?
So there is, on a facility, there is two tanks for contact water, but we have multiple tanks to store fuel. We have around 55 tanks.
And how long you worked for the company?
I've been working for Shell for 18 years.
18 years. The question was asked earlier, has this problem occurred previously?
So we had a secondary sear failure in the past, and we conducted repair and service, and also we had taken tanks out of service in the past to complete repairs.
Well, I think you answered before that no.
No, in the contact water service, Senator. Not in that service, but in a different application we had.
But never like this.
Not in the contact water center, no.
What other cases do you have failure? Not in the contact water?
So the other application will be in gasoline service, for example. A tank would hold gasoline only, that we have that
I see, okay. This is the only one, you just have 2 tanks with water.
2 tank, that's correct.
What's the number of the other tank?
1134.
Never had a problem.
That's not I'm aware of. I only been at Carson since mid-June, but we'll be able to get the record and find out what kind of history we have with 1134.
I know, I just want to remember the question was asked. You said it never existed before, so. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question, but I'll wait till you get back. You mentioned that you need the other tank, the other contact water tank, because it's not full, but you need it for operation. Is there any room? Is there an opportunity to treat some of the water and to move some of the water to the other tank so that we could drain it faster?
Correct. The only room we have is just to continue safe operation in 1134. 1134 is also a count as an emergency. If we have any release that material goes to the sump, it automatically goes to the tank. So if we don't have enough space in the tank to hold the contact, there's potentially a consequence with the tank overflowing.
Okay. And you might have answered this, but I might not have caught it. But are you treating the water at the highest rate that is possible?
That's correct.
Okay, so at the highest rate, does that mean it's a constant treatment?
So the setup for the equipment is just took place last week, and in the process of they go through a ramp up and optimizing the rate, and we're communicating to the contractor that we would like to achieve maximum rate.
Okay, maximum rate. And, okay, so if you have now conveyed that to the contractor, so there's no opportunity to increase the rate?
I'm not aware of the current rate, but our plan is to maximize our treatment.
Okay, and that's where you got the 40 to 45 days to drain the tank?
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Balagopalan?
So you haven't started the removal of the water treatment yet, or if it's already begun, the process?
It's already taken place this morning.
Taken place, okay. This morning you said?
This morning we started, yeah.
So you mentioned earlier, so what's the sequence that's going to happen? So it's about 26 feet, you said, right now?
Correct.
And you have to bring it down to about 7 feet?
Correct.
For the legs to sit on the bottom of the tank?
So once the water treatment is completed, they're going to be a hydrocarbon, and this is where we get vacuum trucks and we transfer the hydrocarbon into portable tanks.
Those are the Baker tanks you were talking about?
Baker tank, correct.
And they'll be shipped off-site?
They'll be shipped off-site, or if we cannot take them anywhere, we put them. The plan is to put them back in a tank when the tank is repaired.
Oh, I see, okay. And then, and when do you go, so once the tank is emptied and the hydrocarbons have been removed, is that the point that then they will, and then once the LEL is determined safe, that's when they go inspect the seals again?
So once is all the liquid out, including the hydrocarbon, and we're connecting to degassing unit and the tank is gas-free, we go through a lockout procedures and we open up the tank to conduct repair. And
do you anticipate replacing all the secondary seals, or it's too premature at this point?
The inspection hasn't been completed, but the visual indication that the whole seal need to be replaced.
Okay. And approximately how long will that operation take?
The replacement of the seal, the secondary seal itself, it takes about 3 days because of the use of hand tools to the replacement, the bolts, and all the entry and the permitting operator permits.
And your primary seal, as far as you know, it's fine?
As far as I know.
Okay, so once the secondary seal is replaced, then you will reintroduce product back into the tank?
So the gap inspection hasn't been conducted yet, so that will determine if the primary seal also need to be replaced or not.
Okay, and what's the gap? The measurement has to be below half inch, or what is the? Okay,
I'm not
that's
sure.
okay, it's
I'm-
in the rule, okay, all right, that's fine. Okay, thank you.
So the inspection itself is conducted by a certified contractors.
Oh, so then, once they give the write-off, then you will reintroduce product back into the tank?
Correct.
Okay.
Any last questions? Senator?
Solomon, just a following question. You've been with the company for 18 years.
Yes.
And you've been at this location for how long?
Since late June, Senator.
Late June. And the case number is 4982-120. You know what that 120 represents?
I don't.
They had 120 problems from time to time. And none include, this is the first time,
That's my first time, correct.
this tank has been involved, considered to have had a problem.
The first time I'm aware of
That you
yours,
know of.
Senator,
Okay.
yes.
So I guess you check the record, you'll find that.
Okay.
I just wanted to point that out 120 times. It could be this tank or another tank or something else. Just focus on it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Mr. Ashworth, do you have any other witnesses you wish to introduce?
No, we do not, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Reichart, do you have any witnesses?
The district is not planning on calling witnesses. I know the board was interested in testimony relating to that permit condition. I can represent the testimony would not differ from the testimony presented by petitioner. So unless the board has any further questions for district staff, the district is not planning to call a witness.
Okay, thank you, and we'll accept that. Any other questions that we would need from the district answered? Seeing none, thank you very much. Okay, I won't ask at this time if there's any member of the public who wishes to be heard, since it has not been noticed to the public. But I will ask for Mr. Ashworth to give your closing statement.
Well, first of all, we wanted to thank you again for your attention to this matter and our ability to work closely with district staff, including both enforcement and the engineering group. As noted by Senator Holt, and there's a long history of this facility with the district, and we've always tried to do our utmost to comply with all the requirements, and where necessary, seek relief from the hearing board. I think our testimony today, as provided by Mr. Solomon and Mr. Waller, indicate that we've met all 6 of the findings that you need to make to grant this interim short variance. And I would like to underscore that the reason we're here and the reason we're taking this approach is driven by safety. The 15% LEL required activities that we had to respect, and for that reason we can only drain this tank. The calculations provided to you will continue to demonstrate the amount of excess emissions, but if we fail to reach your standards for granting a variance, this must continue. And there's nothing else we can do to manage this tank in a safe manner. And going forward, we're committed to monitoring as described with the district, and we will enter into an agreement to do that and calculate the excess emissions as required and bring this tank into compliance as expeditiously as possible. We note that Mr. Bagalapan indicated that additional activities need to take place, but once we're connected to the degassing unit, we'll return to compliance. And for that, we need to extend beyond the 30 days of the emergency variance into the 40 to 45. And we're continuing to do this, again, as expeditiously as possible. And so we would, again, thank the hearing board for its attention, and we'd be happy to respond to any additional questions that you may have.
Before I turn to Ms. Reichart for a closing, did the parties on the break consult with the clerk's with the clerk with regard to a date by which we would hear this matter for short variance, just so we can discuss that in our deliberations?
Yes, we have, and I defer to district counsel on that.
Okay, so then I will ask Ms. Reichart for your closing, and if you could just let us know that date, and we could consider it.
Yes, thank you. Subject to compliance with the proposed conditions as modified, the district is not opposed to the granting of this variance, and in consultation with the clerk, petitioner and the district agreed upon Wednesday, June 12th as a hearing date for a short variance. Thank you.
Thank you. Board members, anyone wish to begin, or I could do that? I do believe, just as I believed with good cause, that the findings for an interim variance can be made in this instance. We already went through many of these findings as part of our discussion and motion on good cause, and so I'm going to just refer to that in certain places. And certainly we have a number of rules and one condition which refers to the rules that petitioner is in non-compliance with, all having to do with the break in the seal and the condition of the secondary seal on tank 1515 and having to do with the delay in repair due to the safety considerations that were mentioned and testified to today. I do, just as I found that it could not be reasonably avoided to find good cause to proceed in this matter, I can also find that it was beyond the reasonable control of the petitioner that they are in the situation they are in. First of all, we did mention that there was the November inspection. These inspections occur every 6 months. There was no indication back in November at the last inspection, visual inspection, that there was any break or any compromise in the secondary seal, and that was found in May at the 6 month, the next time that inspection was done. And so it was beyond their reasonable control to know in advance that that compromise had occurred. It is also, I believe, beyond their reasonable control to have done the repairs within the 72-hour window that is allowed under the rules, having to do with the safety considerations of entering that tank, and then once there, having found that there was, at least in some point in the tank, an LEL, the lower explosion limit, of 15%, which is above the 10%, that is considered safe. And at that point, the only option, as we have heard through testimony, the only option is to take that tank, well, it was already taken out of operation, but to actually drain it and then degas it. So I believe it's beyond their reasonable control to have complied, to be in compliance, and that there will be an arbitrary, unreasonable taking of property, and either one, they would be out of compliance with district rules for a fair amount of time. The estimate is 40 to 45 days without variance protection, even though it's beyond their reasonable control, and so they would be subject to considerable fines, or they would have to jeopardize the safety of their staff and workers and try to repair a tank in unsafe conditions. And both of those would be, I believe, unreasonable taking of property. Without a corresponding benefit in reducing air contaminants. It does seem somewhat significant to me, 7.3 pounds per day of excess VOC emissions, and that's considerably above the 273.6 pounds that is above the 60.1 pounds that would otherwise be calculated. But we did hear, without any evidence to the contrary from the district, that that's a conservative estimate, given that the LEL that's been taken at the hatch has been 0. And we also heard that they're trying to minimize that to the greatest extent feasible by working at the highest rate possible to drain that tank. So I believe I can make that finding, as well as the finding that they are working to reduce excess emissions to the maximum extent feasible by draining it as quickly as possible and getting that degassing equipment in place. Curtailing operations in lieu of a variance is not a consideration. They already have curtailed operations by taking it out of service and not, well, essentially not adding to it or taking from it other than to try and treat it and drain it. But it has to be drained, and they can't repair it until that's until that that happens, and so they won't obviate the need for a variance. Monitoring will be accomplished by the proposed interim variance conditions, and in particular, monitoring the lower explosive limit at the hatch in compliance with proposed condition number 2. And I believe that's all of the findings. Anyone else have anything to add or any thoughts? Mr. Balagopalan?
Yes, I think I agree with what you mentioned. In addition, I think the monitoring requirements, it is required that they do a gap measurement after the tank is emptied and degassed, and it appears Mr. Solomon said that they are going to do that, so that they will be it's supposed to be done once every 10 years, but it looks like this will fulfill their requirement to do the gap measurements once it's emptied and degassed. So I think, and then, so on that, and I think so they will be, once they've done that, they'll be compliant with the monitoring requirements of the rule also.
Thank you for that. Any other comments? Okay. Then I will offer a motion, which will be, in the matter of Equilon Enterprises, LLC, doing business as Shell Oil Products, U.S., case number 4982-120, I move that we grant the interim variance, which will, just make sure. Oh, okay, it can go 90 days, which will begin today, will continue for 90 days or until this matter can be heard for a short variance, which is currently scheduled for June 12th, 2019, whichever occurs first. It is for the location at 20945 South Wilmington Avenue in Carson, 90810. It is for storage tank 1515, which is found on page 2, item number 6 of the petition. And it will be from all of the rules and permit condition that are listed on item number 9, page 3 of the petition, with respect to both the requirement, well, all of these, the requirement that the tank, a secondary seal be in compliance with or in good condition. Also that it be fixed within a 72-hour period, which it cannot, and reporting requirements that were required within 120 hours, which can still not be complied with. And it will contain the proposed interim variance conditions found in Exhibit A with the following changes. First, with regard to condition number 2, in the last sentence, or at the last line, 8 hours, every 8 hours will be changed to every 6 hours. And with regard to item number 5, with regard to the payment of excess emission fees, that will be 15 days, May 29th, 2019. And I believe those are all the changes I propose to the interim variance conditions, except they're no longer proposed. And the excess emissions are anticipated to be 7.1 pounds per day of VOCs, and that completes my motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, Mr. Balagopalan has seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Senator.
Madam Chair, you described what the failure is, or has been shown to be in tank 1515. Is it be more clear if you would indicate somewhere in that motion that that failure is depicted in Exhibit 1, which shows the tank and the seal and so on? You think that's something you want to add? Or? appropriately is depicted.
That it doesn't show it in there. That conceptual drawing does not show precisely where, or maybe it does, but
Depicted, yeah.
I,
Seal, secondary and primary.
as I understood it, Senator, the seal is compromised all the way around because it's been
understand.
flipped over.
It's already been testified to this, run the circumference of it,
That's right.
but it's depicted in the diagram. Now, if you don't think, that's okay, no problem.
No, but I will clarify for the record that my understanding is that the entire seal is compromised. So that's good to add, thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none, and it's been seconded by Mr. Balagopalan. Senator, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ms. Burt, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Balagopalan?
Yes.
I vote yes, motion passes 4-0.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and good luck, and we will see you on June 12th. Okay, board members, we do have one additional hearing. That's our consent calendar matter, and why don't we go off the record just for a couple of minutes so that we can change out our documents and clear the room, and we will proceed. So we're off the record. We are back on the record, and we have one other matter for today, and that is on consent calendar, which means that the parties have agreed not to be present today, although it was a publicly noticed hearing. And it is Federal Aviation Administration Pomona VOR facility, case number 5292-2 for a regular variance. And we have several documents that have been submitted by the parties for this to be placed on consent, and we'll begin with the joint stipulation to place the matter on consent calendar. And in this joint stipulation, the parties have agreed to place the matter on the consent calendar for today. In addition, they have requested that the declaration of Michael Wester be submitted to the hearing board and entered into evidence. And so at this time, I will ask Madam Clerk, what number are we up to for petitioner?
Number
3.
three.
You're right, I do. Thank you very much. We are up to number 3, thank you, as the clerk has so kindly pointed out. So we will mark the declaration of Michael Wester. No, you're right, the petitioner. So we will mark it as number 3, the declaration of Michael Wester. He's a petitioner. He's with the FAA. Okay. In addition, the parties the district does not oppose the granting of the regular variance, and the parties have asked to incorporate all of the evidence and testimony from the interim variance hearing. And so, since there are no objections by the parties, we will hereby incorporate all of the evidence and testimony from that interim variance hearing. And finally, let's mark, we have a proposed findings and decision of the hearing board, and we will mark that as exhibit C. C as in Charlie for the district. Okay, would anyone like to, let me ask, first, that does not need to be marked because that was submitted to, well, they all were, but we don't usually mark that. You do? Bless you. And well, we'll mark it as number 4 because I did not mark it. I marked the declaration as number 3. But let's mark the stipulation as number 4. Okay. Bless you. And I'm going to ask, before we deliberate, if there's any member of the public who is present who wishes to be heard on this matter. And I don't see any. Board members, anyone wish to begin discussion? Ms. Burt.
I'll go ahead. I'll just briefly go back through this hearing in case anyone listening wants to remember. This was a case where there was a theft of copper wire from a transformer from the FAA, and it was important to have this backup generator because it kicks in to provide power, and the power was really crucial because it has to do with the routing of planes over Ontario airport space. So I think we made all the findings before. Nothing has changed. This is a generator that had gone over its hours of usage for this year, and so they came in for an interim variance. Now this is a regular variance to take them through to the end of the year, where after which the time will reset, the number of hours that they have for the generator will reset. So because we made the findings before, because all the findings will be the same, I think we can just look at what the findings were, and I think that we can issue this regular variance with the conditions that were listed, which are probably exactly the same as they were before, or at least similar to what they were before, because nothing has really changed. So for that reason, I think we can make findings. I think we can issue this regular variance to support this unit through the end of the year.
Anyone else wish to add to that? Mr. Balagopalan?
Yes, I know one of the condition is that they shall not operate more than 4.2 hours per month for maintenance testing. In the past, for other utilities that have come before us, we have limited to 1 hour, but I think due to the critical nature, and if they have to do the maintenance and testing for more than an hour, I think this condition allows that, since it's a very critical component in routing the planes. In addition, I think we've heard testimony from other utilities. They either have backup power or they have a relay that's set up for delayed, for 15 minutes or half an hour before the generator kicks in. But again, I don't think they have the luxury here of doing that. So those are things that are not proposed in the condition, and I think that's appropriate.
I think that it was well stated by Ms. Burt. This was a case where the backup generator is over the 200 hours, was over the 200 hours when we made all the findings for the interim, still over the 200 hours. They have to last the whole year. Nothing is different in any of the findings, and so I too can make those findings again. And just to point out for the record, the only differences, as Ms. Burt pointed out, these are the same conditions that are proposed for the regular variance as were for the interim variance, and the only changes is that in condition number 2, those monthly reports, I believe, yes, monthly reports will start in the regular variance in June, which was a different month, obviously, for the interim variance, and the date for excess emission fees was December 31st. Normally, we would probably make that December 30th or some date when at the end of the year when the clerk's office is open. However, we're not going to change it since it was stipulated to, and I think the point is the same. Anyone else wish to add? Okay. Ms. Burt, do you wish to make a motion?
I'll make the motion. In the matter of Federal Aviation Administration, case number 5292-2, I move that we issue this regular variance based on the findings that we have in Exhibit C, and with the following change to the findings, and that's to remove Roger Lerner. I don't have a line for that to reference, but it's in the first paragraph on the first page, since Dr. Lerner is not present.
Line 5.
Line 5. And it's for the facility located at Pomona VOR facility, Fiesta Drive, Pomona, California, 91765. The excess emissions are expected to be the same, and they are as indicated in the minute order. VOCs at 0.29 pounds per hour, NOx at 0.29 pounds per hour, PM at 0.04 pounds per hour, SOx at 0.003 pounds per hour, and CO at 0.39 pounds per hour. And this commences as of today, and it ends when there's a reset at the end of the year for this unit. It'll be with, I already stated, all the conditions that are found in Exhibit C. The order begins on page 7, and that will complete my motion.
I will second the motion, and I just wanted to clarify that the excess emissions are, as you stated them, only when the engine is in use. And that's only when emergency power is necessary or to exercise the engine.
Yes, thank you.
Any other discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none. Senator, how do you vote? Aye. Mr. Balagopalan, how do you vote?
Yes.
I vote yes, and Ms. Burt votes
Yes.
and the motion passes 4-0. Thank you. Any other business, board members? Okay, seeing none, we are adjourned.